Very rarely do we have the kind of game that truly captures our childhood, with the likes of Kids Next Door, Powerpuff Girls, and Dexter's Laboratory to help assist in that matter too. But then it was gone. And not the gone in a jiffy and never seen again type either, but more like a zombie of a game that keeps, to this day, being reanimated and relaunched on fan servers due to tremendous love for the title. Browser-based online RPGs were a thing of the early 2000s and an early love of mine, with the most famous ones being titles like RuneScape, Neopets, Club Penguin, Adventure Quest, and the topic for this video, arguably the most advanced of the titles, Cartoon Network's FusionFall. The capturing the childhood part at the beginning wasn't being facetious. Cartoon Network was the cartoon channel growing up for kids, especially in the US. Cartoon Network would have aspirations of taking over more of the aforementioned childhood by venturing into the very successful virtual world market, teaming up with a Korean developer, Grigon Entertainment, or Grigon Entertainment, to create an MMO that features characters from the Cartoon Network universe. But although FusionFall is still being played 14 years after it launched in many different ways and formats, its live servers only lasted 4. During those 4 years, it was able to impress enough players to build a long-lasting legacy though. In this episode of Death of a Game, we will detail how FusionFall was able to do just that. While, like the series is primarily known for, also hone in on the particular aspects of FusionFall that led to the early death of a game, gathering the clues for a final deduction at the end of the video. The long-awaited and requested death of a game, FusionFall, is here, and I feel a mixture of happiness and sadness, but I shall collect myself as we have a mystery to solve and a story to tell. Thank you to Hero Wars for sponsoring this video. Hero Wars is a mobile title, available on iPhone, iPad, and Android. If you haven't heard about Hero Wars, well, color me surprised, considering it has over 50 million downloads and over 1.5 million reviews. In Hero Wars, everyone can find a character to suit themselves. They have cyborgs, aliens, vampires, and even furries won't be disappointed. Even if you play for multiple weeks, you'll still be encountering new characters to play and enjoy. For example, one of those characters could be Chaba, who's an awesome tank who literally just devours his enemies. But Celeste is also a powerful character who can switch between a DPS dark form and a healer light form, which makes her useful in just about any situation. Plus, they released this quite raunchy alpha for her recently. There's no other game like Hero Wars, really. You're gonna play it on the subway, at lectures, or even while you're playing something else, like an MMO. It has that perfect mixture of active and passive gameplay. Every month there's an event in the game. Recently they rolled out new Titans. The one that I like the most is probably Kyros, the Titan of Darkness. Not only does he look visually appealing, he can also devour enemies' vitality and then attack with it. And don't be worried by all the characters. It's very easy to start playing, but assembling a perfect team of heroes is an art in itself. Mojo, and no, not that Mojo, the shaman can't heal Darkstar the elf as efficiently as the good Grandma Martha can, while the slow Cleaver makes a great pair with the swift Isaac, so it's all about how you match them together. Hero Wars is a world of 6 modes, more than 300 Guild Wars servers, and 100 million players. You can play alone or see who among you and your friends is the top dog too. If you want to know where you can get 30,000 coins, 600 emeralds, and 5 awesome heroes to start playing with right away, just click the link in the description and play Hero Wars now. Thank you to Hero Wars for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the mystery detectives. Cartoon Network was an American TV channel responsible for entertaining many of our childhoods. Cartoon Network is from 1992 and has survived multiple different iterations and decades of variety of strong shows, ranging from older ones to newer ones like Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Kids Next Door, to Ben 10 and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Truly there is too much to even account for, as there were also multiple sub-channels of Cartoon Network, like the classic cartoon channel Boomerang and every teenager's favorite Toonami turned Adult Swim. During the heyday of Cartoon Network, the company would create numerous video games to populate their website. CN would reportedly express great interest internally in none other than a supposed massive online multiplayer title as well. Although the rumors for this began back in 2002 within Cartoon Network, it would take an entire 4 years for them to actually make a proper announcement and movement towards actually making it a reality. Chris Waldron, executive producer at Cartoon Network, would claim that due to having a lot of business responsibilities, being a company who works for Turner/Time Warner, alongside the desire to search long and hard for the right developer contributed to this 4-year period. Searching far and wide wasn't an exaggeration either. Cartoon Network would specifically go to one of the meccas of online RPGs, Korea, in an effort to find the right kind of developer to partner with. Western developers apparently didn't make the cut, and Grigon Entertainment was able to greatly impress the Cartoon Network team when they met. Something else I was also notified about from a source was that at this time Cartoon Network was making a transition. They started to go to a more new age of animation style, and their old audience was starting to just get older. They saw the great popularity of anime on their platform and wanted to tap into that at the same time. This made them want to go to an Asian developer to accomplish a more anime-styled online RPG, compared to a traditional cartoon-drawn style. This would later lead to FusionFall's iconic style, which feels like an ode to Mega Man Legends, one of my personal favorites. Another element of this was the aging up of the characters to also further appeal to this teenage audience, which was, a younger audience who had grown up now. But it should be noted that Cartoon Network capturing the teenage anime crowd was a deliberate move to grab a massively growing, singular and generally, audience. But it also meant in some ways visually, the game was going to be at odds with some players who prefer the more Western approach. The visual style wouldn't only be Korean influenced either. With Grigon Entertainment would come inspiration from the very young in the West, but quite budding free-to-play market later on in Korea, introducing players of all kinds to free-to-play for many, for the first time. Development for FusionFall would start on April 2006. Grigon Entertainment would have to produce 2 prototypes in their wooing process of Cartoon Network, one in Unity and one in Gamebryo. Grigon would end up going with Gamebryo, a quite common MMO engine especially at the time, to lead development on the game. Grigon Entertainment previously had some level of success with their Korean-only title Seal Online, which in my opinion kind of looks like Fly for Fun with slight cel shading. You can really see the later inspiration though for FusionFall. Things would shift greatly though, nearing the end of the game's development. Up to that point the game had been developed with Gamebryo, like mentioned, even so much so that the first trailer shown for the game was utilizing that engine version. But Cartoon Network and Grigon would express a desire to appeal to a broader range of PCs, and to satisfy that, they would need a more simple and approachable engine, which they would turn to Unity again for. Unity was selected to help appeal to less powerful PCs, but also because FusionFall would be making a significant transition from a PC game to a browser game. This, in my opinion, would end up cementing FusionFall as one of the greatest titles in a sense. As I will describe more later on, it was able to effectively be a Ferrari on the browser, which came with its issues as well. FusionFall had its first open beta in November of 2008. This would be the first time I got the chance to play the game. Open beta FusionFall was a great tease for many of us young teens, as we were super eager to try the game out for free. However, because FusionFall would switch their engine, they would have to push their launch back to January of 2009. They would continue hosting betas for test purposes during this time, having a few more betas before ending December 27, 2008 with a rare no-wipe beta. Yeah, you heard that. Their final beta was a no-wipe beta. If you played after the 22nd of December, your character was persistent and carried over, which was pretty unheard of at the time. It's also a risky play if you don't have enough content to satisfy your audience. You know what's also quite unheard of? A niche YouTuber like myself making a healthy wage. But don't worry, you can help me and Tom, my editor there. By subscribing to our YouTube membership or Patreon, you are supporting the creation of more like-minded content, less reliance on ad revenue and ads in general, and helping me continue to provide a service in both educating on virtual worlds and documenting their histories. FusionFall would launch January 14th, 2009, featuring a subscription fee of $6 monthly required to play the full content in the game. For free-to-play players, they would only be restricted to the future portion of the game, which would only have access to 4 nanos and a level 5 cap. Nanos were heroes from the Cartoon Network universe that you could augment yourself with, which could grant you new active abilities or passive ones. But blocking you only to 4 was pretty significant when the full game had 40. This was an interesting revelation, as FusionFall was clearly targeting a younger audience, meanwhile still wanting to ask for a $6 monthly fee. To be fair, that's over half less than what the cost was normally for the time, but it meant that FusionFall would be preventing quite a few players from playing the game, and was now reliant on having a properly sized population and content sourcing to warrant that subscription cost. Not to mention, focusing primarily on the younger content meant that it was hamstrung in trying to compete with the upper ceiling of the MMOs at the time, which also were charging monthly fees. It doesn't matter if they're a kid-focused MMO, they still have to compete with other paid MMOs. FusionFall as a game consisted of the player creating their very own avatar and choosing one of the 4 guides, Ben Tennyson, Dexter, Ed, and Mojo Jojo, to help in your journey. These guides would provide progression and guidance in the way of quests, gear, and dialogue. Nanos, on the other hand, were other CN characters throughout the game you must complete quest lines to unlock. Once unlocked, these Nanos can provide the user with active and passive augments. FusionFall was third person and featured action combat akin to something kind of like Spiral Knights that I just recently covered on the series, but quite a few years before, and the Nanos would allow you to add more diverse and powerful abilities to the classic action attacks. Weapons such as rifles, scatterguns, rocket launchers, pistols, melee weapons, and thrown weapons were used primarily. Which sounds like interesting weapon choices for a kid's MMO. Ugh, Americans starting them young. You were allowed up to 2 main weapons to switch from as well. There wasn't a huge focus on precision aiming in FusionFall, but there was enough aiming and action to keep the game feeling like active and fresh, something that not many MMOs at the time could say. Lord Fuse's monsters, the main antagonists of FusionFall, were littered throughout the world, providing you with different unique challenges. The locations and zones throughout the game were taken from popular Cartoon Network series. For Cartoon Network fans, this game was a walk through memory lane, a dose of nostalgia, and quite the serious game for a Cartoon Network project. That's because Cartoon Network had its share of good games on the website, some I spent many hours playing, but FusionFall was a serious title. Not many critical reviews were done on FusionFall, accounting for a decent score on Metacritic from just a few critics. But IGN, who scored the game a 70 out of 100, would have an ultimate conclusion concerning the game of, if you compare Cartoon Network Universe FusionFall to top-tier MMOs like World of Warcraft or Warhammer Online, you'll set yourself up for disappointment. Rather, developer Grigon Entertainment has developed a really accessible, easy, and streamlined experience for the young ones. FusionFall didn't necessarily need to beat these aforementioned titles at what they did best, or even just beat them period, but it had to be at least feature competitive. The issue with kid-focused MMOs is that they're generally just that. They're not feature competitive. They typically just have less features offered in general due to streamlining a lot more of the game, and the big focus on helping guide players through the experiences. This means big things like raids and dungeons are sorely lacking. Like period. FusionFall would impress many fans all the same though, big critical reception or not, developing quite the cult following within its first year of life, which is to say that it maybe could have achieved more content in the classical way of an MMO. By the end of 2009, a grim fate would face FusionFall developer Grigon Entertainment. After a failed public bid in Korea, the company would suddenly shut down and complete development of FusionFall had been handed over to Cartoon Network's own development team. It's unsure if the bid itself caused this, or the bid was caused due to them running out of funds, and FusionFall just not doing well enough. This would come as quite a shock, because although FusionFall wasn't quite the mainstream MMO powerhouse as some of the other top 5 titles, it was still impressive and appreciated enough to have a place in the space. Suddenly fans of FF were questioning what this would mean for the future of the game, just ending the same year of the game's launch. Grigon had intentions of introducing a world map travel system utilizing the Rowdy Rough Boys from the Powerpuff Girls series, allowing you to travel to other zones, including new zones that would have been added later on. Their vision for what the game could have been would never be realized though. One can't help but think that the limited audience of FusionFall was a major culprit here. However, more so than you're thinking. Not just the base players who were already playing, but shockingly, FusionFall was only launched in the US, which might make sense because CN is an American channel, but MMOs generally by nature are a global phenomenon. Sure, every MMO has a market focus generally, but FusionFall only launching in the West meant that the entire rest of the West was left in the dark regarding playing the game, and ironically the East, which is where the developer themselves was based from, which seems strange to say the least. There might have been more ambitions to bring FusionFall to more markets later on. They did have an EU website that basically just said coming soon and then never came, but those ambitions were never properly realized, which made FusionFall a limited affair for a massive multiplayer game, which was a severe liability and a damn shame for the rest of the world. Reportedly, the CN team tasked with working on FusionFall had things suddenly thrust into their lap, and they knew early on that they couldn't keep up with the content demands needed for a subscription-based title. There were also reports that the passion for a difficult online RPG was lacking amongst the team too. Both of those reasons and a lack of paid subscribers would contribute to FusionFall going free-to-play as a title in April of 2010. Free-to-play isn't an inherently bad business model. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's incredibly effective. But when a subscription-based game goes free-to-play, there was always a negative connotation that went with it back then. This is often seen as the last-ditch effort for the game to stay alive. At the very least, there's signs that something's going wrong. And although FusionFall would share some success from their Switch and be played by more than ever before, much of the excitement about FusionFall in general was gone with their original developer. Content by the beginning of 2010 had just slowed to a halt, and that was probably a big reason for it. Although there was fun to be had in FusionFall, there just was issues of lack of content and a lack of strong lasting features in general. On top of these issues, since launch, there was big performance issues. Despite FusionFall seemingly having simple graphics and being playable in a browser, it was actually a quite advanced game that wasn't well optimized as other top MMOs of the time. It probably didn't help that they didn't have the original developer working on the title anymore, but WoW was dominating in 2009 and 2010, and it was able to run on a toaster. Part of how it was so effective at attracting all kinds of players from all age groups was because of that. Besides performance issues, FusionFall was also lacking in industry standards like big raids, dungeons, and a PvP presence. FusionFall was struggling to compete with the likes of WoW and more. Browser games were also just slowly losing their time in the sun as PCs became more and more affordable, which didn't help matters either. The Cartoon Network team didn't have much desire in continuing the development on FusionFall, which was rather tragic for the game and hamstringed any chances that it had of more success. But it wasn't their fault completely. I mean, it wasn't really their game originally to develop. Unlike most online or offline games, MMOs require constant development. The CN team instead wanted to elect to pivot to another project altogether, dubbing what would be described as a sequel to FusionFall, FusionFall Heroes, going as far to even choose a completely different style of gameplay and design as well. FusionFall Heroes, instead of allowing you to create your own avatar, would now allow you to play as different iconic characters, including variants of them. Now, if you saw my video on Marvel Heroes, you know that I hate the concept of variants. They remove personalities and a true identity from the game, and just seem like a lazy way to fill a quota. With the somewhat successful launch of FusionFall Heroes though, what news came in the fall of 2013 wasn't completely surprising to people, but it was tragic nonetheless. FusionFall would shut down August 29, 2013, signaling a clear shift in focus to FusionFall Heroes. This would anger many FusionFall fans, as some felt that FusionFall Heroes didn't even really qualify as a proper sequel or a FusionFall title, and was nothing like the original title. The anger more so came from the fact that because Heroes even existed, it certainly contributed to FusionFall's original death by diverting focus and resources. But just like that, 4 years after launching FusionFall, despite putting an impression on many of our childhoods, the game was shuttered. Leave it up to passionate fans to save the day though. FusionFall wouldn't be unplayable for long. Within a few years, there was a serious revival project that was launched, dubbed FusionFall Retro. This and many other fan servers would come to allow a new generation of fans to enjoy the art and games that had such a short shelf life, and the veteran players who loved the game originally. But like many other fan servers, these emulators would offer even more optimizations and content when compared to the original games. A year after the birth of private servers, and not so much a coincidence when ignoring your audience's desires, FusionFall Heroes would also be shut down, this time in 2018. It would last a year longer than the original FF, but never quite have the same legacy and lasting impact. Many fans felt that the base for FusionFall was impressive enough that if they just simply built upon that, the game would have been better, including better than the not-so-wanted FusionFall Heroes. The ever-going battle of video game preservation isn't going away anytime soon, especially if you enjoy virtual worlds as much as I do and, well, you make a living talking about them. The virtual world space is a war zone regarding preservation at the moment, as there's not currently enough legal protections to keep online games alive from an artistic preservation standpoint. Many developers and publishers have elected to provide proper art preservation and support, even going as far to officiating some of these aspects. Unfortunately, others have elected to use their US sword-like law to slice through any diehard fans' desires to keep their favorite worlds alive. If this sounds like an exaggeration, it isn't, and if this sounds nerdy, then literally why are you watching this? Virtual worlds are effectively worlds, right? That's the point. Just in a virtual space. They are incredibly important for reasons of social, economic, and serving as a third place for many needing gamers. When a publisher or developer shows no intention of keeping a live server going, they should pass that right on to the community or public commons. Protecting the copyright for a game or world you will never play or support a game just seems completely trite, when most of the community we're talking about doesn't even profit from the game. On top of that, many of these projects such as FusionFall were short-lived, so being militant with allowing the fanbase to resurrect your game's server is just artistically wrong. Now before the supposed business heads weigh in here, don't worry, I used to work for a Fortune 500 company too. The issue is that developers and publishers on the game box make an agreement with you when they state that the game is always online. This is an agreement that these developers and publishers fail to satisfy when the servers are brought down, which is why I think allowing the fanbase to resurrect them is actually quite justified even from a business perspective. Unfortunately, FusionFall would fall, no pun intended, victim to the long of the law. April 16, 2020, FusionFall Retro and another emulated project, FusionFall Legacy, and probably many of the other projects I don't really know about, would be DMCA'd by Cartoon Network, resulting in a shutdown of subsequent projects. Some of these projects had been running for nearly as long as FusionFall did originally, so the DMCAs and shutdowns were quite tragic for the player bases. Fear not, Open Fusion would swoop in August 2020 and really sort of save the day. Not only would Open Fusion now allow for players to host their own offline single-player servers, they could host servers for their friends. This leap in preservation was monumental for FusionFall, and arguably is the strongest move in the MMO community preservation playbook. Like a zombie, FusionFall would continue to see yet more fan servers, with two new ones sprouting up, Retribution and Restart, teased in December of 2022 and January of 2023. These servers led by veterans promise to accomplish what the previous fan servers were able to do and more. Seeing this level of passion for keeping FusionFall or really any online RPG alive is just really awe-inspiring for me, as somebody who's personally benefited from playing emulated servers throughout my life. The characters in FusionFall were the closest mini fans could get to their favorite cartoon characters. It's easy to see how the game was so impactful, right? If you haven't gotten the chance to play FusionFall yet, well, at least try Open Fusion with some of your friends and see why so many people love this ill-fated title. And best of luck to the two major community projects in development, as the publisher has already shown a desire to squash prior projects, which is scary. I mean, you can't have the community making a better game than you were able to, right? And being willing to continue to support it even without much of a profit. That's the music, which means it's time to take the gathered clues and evidence thus far and solve the death of a game, FusionFall Detectives. Original developer was shut down. A subscription-based MMO for kids. Performance issues. Lack of exposure in the market, US only. Lacking a feature set to compete against other MMOs. Lack of content. There aren't many titles quite like FusionFall. It was the Rolls-Royce of browser games, which brought complications, but absolutely set the game apart in the history books and has given it quite the legacy. There aren't many crossover universe MMOs that feature so many different popular pieces of media. Toontown, a Disney-based cartoon MMO that we also covered on the series, was comparable, but they had pseudo-Disney characters. FusionFall actually featured many of our childhood favorites, and at the same time, which makes FusionFall easily one of the most memorable titles on this series of all time. Could we ever even see another title like FusionFall attempted again, let alone in a now seemingly defunct browser format? Only time would tell, detectives, but this story has come to an end, and we have yet more mysteries to solve ahead of us. Thanks for watching.